Commissioner, for the last 40 or more years, I would suggest that one of the top issues in New Jersey has been ever escalating property taxes. And I believe your division is responsible for helping to control that to some degree. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that. Specifically, the Consolidated Municipal Property Tax Relief Act is the essentially the component that hopefully would allow municipalities to be able to receive adequate sums of state aid to keep their tax levies at 2% or less. However, it would appear that we're not really funding that, and just wanted to get your take on why we are not putting a lot of funding into that and what you believe we can be doing from the municipal perspective anyway to control the ever rising property taxes.
So there are certainly some pressures that are outside of many municipalities' control right now. I know we talked about that a little bit with Assembly of Venezia when we're talking about transitional aid, so exorbitant healthcare costs, exorbitant pension costs. Those have put extraordinary pressures on all municipalities across the state of New Jersey. I think in average we were seeing like a 9% increase across the board. What I will say about CMPTRA and ETR is, yes, it has been flat for the last 2 years. There are other things that the state has done that were geared towards offsetting property taxes, for lack of a better term. One of them is actually the Anchor program. I know it's not my program to tout, it's certainly the treasurer's to tout, but the premise behind it was that it was actually to reduce property taxes. I know a lot of folks saw it as a rebate check, but it was the whole goal behind it is actually property tax reduction. So while certain things maybe have not been increased in funding like CMPTRA and ETR to your point, other programs have been stood up. I think we could talk about making sure that we are communicating to our residents and constituents effectively to make sure that they understand the whole of property tax relief in the state of New Jersey. When it comes to CMPTRA and ETR in particular, there's a bill that's circulating that our Division of Local Government Services worked with the legislature on previously. S 1833, I believe, is the bill. That was going to, and I think maybe one of your colleagues might be a main sponsor of that bill on this committee. And so that looks to recalculate what CMPTRA and ETR should look like across the state of New Jersey for what municipal aid should be. Why? So CMPTRA and ETR has been frozen in its formula for the last several decades, has not been looked at since. So this would give us an opportunity to make sure that we are reevaluating what those criteria should be on an annual basis. So that way we are actually responding to the needs of the communities as they move along. So happy to continue that conversation with you and your colleagues.
Is there a policy reason for which we are not funding CMPTRA?
I think that's a budget conversation that I think the governor has made really clear. She was looking to make sure that she was not increasing things in the budget this year unless and until she had that robust conversation and engagement with the legislature. So it's my understanding that everything is on the table to have a conversation about. If that's one of the priorities that the legislature wants to put forward, I'm sure that the governor and her team would love to talk about it.
Thank you, Commissioner. And you just said something in response that I may have misunderstood. You had referenced a 9% increase in the last 2 years. Are you referring to the rise in property taxes?
I'm talking about the rise in just what we're seeing from municipalities, which usually translates into some sort of property taxes. But what we're talking about is what their increases are and what their costs are. So it's outpacing essentially what they can do with taxes.
Gotcha. And we're looking at 9% increases, but there's still a 2% cap. How do we reconcile that discrepancy?
So there is a 2% cap, you are correct, but there's also a mechanism by which many municipalities, and I'm going to really get into the weeds and get nerdy here for a second, but many municipalities do what we call cap bank. And so they actually bank. If they don't use their 2% every year, they go in and they actually bank that. So it's a pot of money that, or I shouldn't say money, it's not a pot of money, but it's a mechanism by which they can actually increase taxes at a greater level because they haven't done it kind of in the past, and then it helps to offset what those increases look like for this year. So it's a fiscally prudent mechanism that many municipalities across the state of New Jersey take advantage of.
And in addition to the cap banking, I believe that there are also a multitude of exceptions, health
Correct.
benefit costs, pension, debt, and I know the list goes on, but to actually see 2 years in a row of 9% increases, that strikes me that we're kind of at a crisis point with our municipalities. I don't want to get into what the Assemblyman already went over with respect to transitional aid, but it would seem that it won't be long before we see 500 or more of our 565 municipalities applying for that transitional aid if we are on a trend of increases of 9%. I believe, Commissioner, the average tax being paid by our property taxpayers for 2025 was $10,570. Does that number appear accurate to you?
Yes.
So I think you would agree that not only do we have a spending problem, but there would appear to be a little bit of a disconnect between what the state is doing to assist our municipalities, whether it be CMPTRA or ETF or any of the other property tax relief programs. State mandate, state pay might be another one. But anything more that you believe we can be looking at to improve the situation?
I think we have kind of hit the tipping point where we need to start having conversations about property tax relief, CMPTRA ETR reform, transitional aid reform, along with even the 2% cap. It was always an arbitrary number.
Yeah.
So I think that time has come where we need to have a conversation. So that way municipalities are not trying to utilize either one-time fixes and that they are setting themselves up for structural success with their budgets. And so I've already had conversations along those lines with some of your colleagues over the last few years. I know the Sherrill administration has made it abundantly clear that she would also like to be having these conversations, and I think that time might be now. So I think we should be having more robust discussions about what the formulas and what the paths forward should look like for our municipalities. And I'm pretty sure DLGS also has some serious considerations and suggestions as to how we can make that happen.
I appreciate that, Commissioner. Are we seeing more municipalities in distress today than perhaps at any point during your tenure with the state?
I don't know if I would say it's distress. I think they're seeing more pressures budgetarily than any time in my tenure. That is also cyclical, though. So I may look much older because of my work that I do, but I have not been around long enough to see all of the actual economic cycles as they funnel through the municipalities. So it's certainly, I wouldn't say it's the worst that it's ever been. Is it maybe the more fiscally, there are more fiscal pressures than before in my tenure? Yes. But you also have to understand a lot of those were alleviated by some of the federal funding that was done over the last several years through SFRF dollars and ARP dollars. That artificially offset some of the pressures that we would have seen earlier from these municipalities and kind of almost was a kick the can down the road a little bit mentality. And so we're seeing some of that come to roost now that those funding sources are no longer available.
Sure. The sharp drop off following COVID relief funding having ended. So understandable. Just to change topics for a quick moment before I conclude. In March of this year, there was a law that went into effect pertaining to rent control, which I believe DCA has some responsibility with respect to oversight. Can you speak to what your experience has been with the rent control law that is now operational as of March?
So I think you're probably talking about the manufactured home
Correct.
component of it.
I
So
apologize. I
that,
should
no,
have.
no, that's okay. I just want to be really clear. I don't want everybody to call DCA about rent control. It's a very narrow prescripted portion of rent control that falls under our jurisdiction now. We are working to kind of stand up. There's going to be like a council of sorts housed within DCA that we're going to be helping to kind of oversee this. And we're kind of in the process of getting all of that stood up. But yes, to your point, it is going to be narrowly prescribed solely for manufactured home rent control.
And I know, Commissioner, that complaints are designed to go to the Division of Consumer Affairs. That's obviously under the Attorney General. How does DCA get a hold of the resolution of those complaints to guide the agency in the enforcement aspect to ensure that the mobile home communities are operating in accordance with the law and with whatever outcome there may be from the Division of Consumer Affairs?
So we'll have to stand up a process with them by which we can exchange the information easily. Our portion of it is going to be making sure that if they go over a certain threshold, they would have to be able to justify, and we would have to approve it, right? So that's kind of the way that it would work. Other agencies around the state have a similar system in place for limited scope as well. So there's certainly models already out there for it. This would just take us putting a procedure in place to make sure that nothing's falling through the cracks, and an actual procedure so that way it's not one employee talking to another and when one of them retire or move into a different position, that things don't fall through the cracks again.
Yes, and speaking of falling through the cracks, one of the main concerns of the rent control law pertaining to mobile home communities is that I'll call it an artificial cap that is placed upon rental increases may result in the deterioration of those communities. Less money for the parks to properly maintain not only the landscaping, but the other roads and aspects of the community that typically you would expect them to maintain in good order. I know that there is a provision where they can apply for a capital improvement increase, but outside of that, do you, as the commissioner, have concerns in terms of what the overall impact is going to be on the mobile home communities?
I don't, because it was my recollection when I looked at the legislation last that there was a mechanism whereby it wasn't just for the limited item that you're talking about, that they would be able to come to the department and advocate for why they might need a larger increase than what the standard was dictated in the legislation. So that could be, for example, property tax increases, or that could be utility increases, or cost of doing business increases. So we've seen this done around the state, as I mentioned, and there's always a mechanism by which they can justify what the increase is, and then that would be a conversation to go back and forth. So no, I do not see it as there's going to be a deterioration in the aesthetics or functionality of these parks around the state of New Jersey, because there's a mechanism by which we can deal with that.
And I hope you're correct with respect to that. So I think it is a concern. Obviously, it's a new law. Perhaps there'll be growing pains, but
Always.
time will tell.
Yeah.
Commissioner, thank you.